What is up, my nerds? Welcome back. A little update on Project Radd Maxx. Pop open this brand new Max 5 speed control. It's all in the plastic, kind of go through what's in there, basic unboxing. And then I want to show that all the programmers work and see if it needs any updates and fun stuff like that. So let's get into it. Fresh electronics. One of my favorite things. Look at the size of that thing. That is a monstrous speed control for a monster truck. In case you don't know what Project Radd Maxx is, I am working on an Xmaxx, a Traxxas Xmaxx, that we're going to kind of max out, if you will. No pun intended, but we're going to try to put a bunch of upgrades onto the truck, try all the different motors from the EZRun series, and see how fast we can make that thing go. Package includes some nice double-sided tape, some shrink tubing, a couple zip ties, sweet stickers, best friend in the whole wide world, the instruction manual, and some wires. So, wires are included. The battery wires are already attached inside the speed control. This big guy is so if you're running dual battery packs, you're ready to go and you have your series jumper. But the speed control itself has bullet plugs for the motors so that you can replace your motor plugs real easily and, you know, adjust those for length on your motors as necessary. 10 gauge wire, and these are, let's confirm, 6.5 millimeter plugs is what. And then the battery wires are actually 8 gauge, so even bigger. But man, that is a beefy. I have small hands, and that speed control looks large. Let's put it next to here. If you got the programming card, it's bigger than the programming card. One thing a lot of folks don't know is that the EZRun Max series of speed controls is the only series that works with all 3 of the programming devices. It'll work with the LED programming card, it'll work with the multifunction LCD programming box, the one that has the blue screen, and it'll also work with the Wi-Fi Express. So that's pretty cool. For some situations, I like to just use the LED box, because if you know what your settings are, you're going to change this real easy. And the normal LED box has the sticker on that matches the settings that are in the speed control. Any of the LED programming boxes, or cards rather, should work with these as far as functionality goes. And a box, or a Wi-Fi Express or whatever, is only showing you the settings inside of your speed control. So if stuff doesn't seem to match, this is when your best friend comes out, and in your instruction manual, there is a chart right in the middle, programming table, and this will tell you what the numbers on the screen mean. So for the most part, you can cut this guy out of your manual and keep it in your toolbox, and that way you always know what your settings are, so to speak. I get a lot of that people say the numbers don't match because of whatever, box stickers are different, so just use your instruction manual. And then first thing I want to do, put a plug on it, obviously. This is an AMAS, the number on it says QS8S, and it's the anti-spark style. I'm gonna, for the sakes of testing for right now, this is just a single 4S Intellect 6,000 milliamp HP pack. This is what I'm gonna end up using for, you know, basically getting stuff going. And when you go to solder these big wires, you're gonna need a good hot iron. I tend to use leaded solder if I can get it. If I can't get leaded solder, you want to get solder or like the silver solder, the lead-free solder that's out there, and you want to have some flux around if you don't have, you know, normal leaded rosin core solder like this. It's getting harder to find this stuff. International Electronics, they don't like you to have leaded solder, so everything is lead-free, which, if you're familiar with electronics, what that's all about. But basically it just means the solder's different, so that when your electronics get recycled or whatever, you're not putting lead into all that. And then the iron I use, this is an old Haku station, but I use the large chisel tip, and I try to get that to probably 750 to 850 degrees at least on the Fahrenheit. And if you're using a regular iron, probably 50-60 watts at least. When you solder, you always want to work in a well-ventilated area. You want to wear eye protection. Solder splashes and stuff like that are all no fun. So let's get down to it. When I solder plugs on, sometimes it's good to have a little piece of wood block around. Not only for hobbying, you drill holes into plastic and stuff, but when you solder, you got a place that won't melt your bench. As you can see, I don't always use it. My bench is very melted up. This guy, these AMAS plugs come with these insulation protector guys, so you don't have to do shrink tubing anymore, which I think is real cool. And then the positive and negative are marked relatively clearly right on there. So we'll do the positive first. Actually, we'll do the negative. These are, I really like these because they stand up, so it kind of makes somewhat easy access to soldering. Now, another thing is I like about these plugs is these are solder cups instead of tube. A lot of times when you solder into a tube, the wire is going to end up floating in the solder, and that makes for a very poor connection. Solder is a poor conductor, if you didn't know. And what happens is you get a lot of false LiPo cutoff and weird shutdown stuff that starts to happen because of that bad connection. The car runs okay for a couple minutes, then it shuts off. A lot of that comes from the wire floating in the solder. So real good if you can not, get the wire with a little bit of solder on there for the sake of tinning it, and then you want to get it down onto the plug, or onto the surface of the metal, and make sure that that's not floating in solder. And with a lot of the tube style plugs that are out there, that can be real hard to do, to get the wire actually onto the metal, because even if you were to push the wire straight in, you're only making like this much contact as opposed to this much contact. So I'm kind of a big fan of these cup style plugs for a number of reasons. And if you've ever called tech support and talked to me about this stuff, I probably read you the riot act, so to speak, about this plug situation, because it's a daily occurrence around here with speed controls that are for the most part brand new or fine, and they work great, and then they just do some goofy shutdown stuff either every once in a while or even consistently. And sometimes even they worked fine before, and then suddenly they stop working. And some of that comes from the plugs starting to wear, and a lot of it usually comes from solder connection topics. And I have been running into a ton of batteries out there that have fake plugs on them, which aren't made of good materials, and they give people lots of grief as well. So couple simple pro tips when you're building up your Xmaxxes, or you're doing your limitlesses and all those big go fast rigs that are out there. Now that is a horrible job of cameramanning, as I covered the whole process up with my hand. But basically the wire is down onto the metal surface. There's not a lot of solder surrounding everything. That way you can see all the edges are nice and clean and flat, and the wire is kind of mashed down a little flat to get in there. So this guy clicks in. It's a hard click. There we go. My office hands don't do a good job of the hard work around here sometimes. Let's go ahead and hook up the Wi-Fi Express first, because that's a little easier to show the screen stuff and talk about it all, because it's all right on there. So, okay, so we're going to take this Max 5 and plug in the Wi-Fi Express. If you didn't know, they go to the fan port. We also get a lot of folks that want to leave the Wi-Fi Express plugged into the truck while they drive it around. I've done that once or twice. I'm not a fan. The thing beating around in there, a little bit of extra load on your BEC is not a good thing, but it can be done. And then you just get a normal servo Y harness that has the 3 wires. You plug the one end into there, and then you plug the fan and the Wi-Fi Express on the other side, and then you securely mount this guy. Now, mind you, if any damage happens to this wire, it directly happens to the speed control also, so you'll get that kind of short or whatever the case may be from those wires. It's going to give you some grief. So first things first, this speed control is not connected and or calibrated yet. So if you don't calibrate your speed control, you want to unplug it from the receiver to make sure that it's not being told to do anything, because that'll lock you out of being able to use the programmer, which a lot of people get very frustrated with. So plug in a battery pack, positive, negative is all correct. I got the bullets in there correct. Okay, battery's plugged in, turn the speed control on, Wi-Fi Express, the light comes on, and then you're going to go to your phone, and in the settings, you're going to go to connections, and you're going to go to the Wi-Fi settings, and then usually I try to make it scan. You give your phone a little drag like that, and it'll scan your networks. HW Wi-Fi link. I never changed the name on this particular one. It's going to check for the quality of your internet connection, and it usually doesn't like that because there's no actual internet used when your Wi-Fi and Express is being used. You're just using the Wi-Fi signal as like your invisible wire through the air. So that says it's connected without internet. That's good. That's what we want. So then we go back to the home screen, and then we open up our HW link here. And then when you go to use the app to get and connect with your speed control, you tap here first, and that's going to load the data, find the speed control that's there. If this doesn't come up or you get the wrong info, you have to go to your settings and make sure that you're on Wi-Fi. A lot of times people put it on Bluetooth for whatever reason. So once it connects, you get the little dancing icon, and then you're good to go, and then you can check for a firmware update if you want. It shows firmware version B132, target version B132, so no updates available. That's pretty typical. The EZRun series doesn't have a bunch of updates. So you can back out of here, and then we can go into the parameters and start making some changes. So inside are all of your settings that your speed control has available, and this is the same that it is on the LCD box or the chart that's in the instruction manual that works with the LED card. So running mode is your forward reverse brake. So if you want to turn your reverse off, this is where you can do that. LiPo cells is auto calculate, so it'll figure out based off the start voltage if it's a 3-cell, 4-cell, 5-cell, whatever the case, or 6-cell rather. And then the low voltage cutoff is how far into the battery it's going to let it run before it cuts off. There's a lot of times people think this is going to be a number, a value of some sort, but the problem is with LiPo cutoff, people assume that when they connect and measure their battery, it's going to match the voltage setting, and that's not necessarily the case because of the way batteries react to loads and stuff like that. Those voltages very rarely match. So we've kind of gone to a simpler format of low, intermediate, and high. Low being the most runtime, intermediate being kind of semi-safe, and high being the least amount of runtime out of the battery. So the highest cutoff voltage is what that stands for. Generally speaking, low is probably around like 3.1 to 3.3. Intermediate's probably like 3.4 to maybe 3.56, somewhere in there, 5 or 6. And then high is a little bit above 3.7 in most situations. But again, it really depends on how hard it gets run. Like if you drive it real aggressive, those numbers are going to be a little bit different. Then we have, next up is the thermal protection for the motor, or for the speed control rather, and then motor thermal protection, which is coming later. The speed controls currently don't have the motor protection temp port in there, but they will later. And then motor rotation. So in sensorless, you can just switch the wires, but sometimes the install's so clean you don't want to switch the wires, so you can do motor rotation here as well, which is nice. BEC voltage is adjustable, so if you have a high voltage servo, that's where you change that. And then your max brake force and max reverse force, so that you can have nice firm brakes and then limited reverse so that you're not flipping over backwards and stuff like that. But basically those max brake force and max reverse force are exactly that. How fast or how hard the brakes are and how fast the reverse is. So pretty straightforward. And then your start mode is directly related to how linear your throttle is. So if you would like to click to full throttle, you put that all the way up, and that'll give you the most one-to-one response. If you get a lot of shutdowns and it doesn't want to be a happy camper, you're running kind of maybe smaller plugs or lower C ratings, stuff like that, you can turn that down because it'll make it so that when you move the throttle real aggressively, the speed control won't do that. And then drag brake are the brakes that come on when you let off the throttle. So think of it like engine braking, or what's often called coast brake. So it's like an automatic brake that gets applied. So for some of the racing applications, folks like to have a little bit of drag brake, or for jumping applications, if they're doing certain jumps, they want a little bit of drag brake so they don't have to think about doing stuff. And then you can also rename your profile, which is handy. Sometimes if you got lots of vehicles, you get confusing if you're working on all of them. And you can even change your profile picture to match accordingly. So very cool stuff there. When you do go in and make a setting change, let's say we want to turn the reverse off, you got to hit save. Don't forget to hit save. That's a big deal. A lot of times you'll make a bunch of changes and you'll forget to do that. So you see it changed it. We're going to go back to forward, reverse, and brake, hit save, and away we go. Now, let's also take all of this and try the other programming devices now that we walked through all of that. Exit, exit, and disconnect. Okay. So with the LED card, is what I call it, it's got red numbers on it. And normally, this is the wrong box. This is the one that comes with a WP1080 brushed speed control. So the information on here does not match correctly, but I would use the instruction manual's chart so that I would have the correct numbers to work with. But this is just to show that it works. So you can turn it on, and then the numbers show up, and away you go, and you can see you can go through all that stuff, and it's got the same, it's 11 settings altogether. So that guy works. Like I said, just use your instruction manual chart if you have the one that doesn't have your right sticker on the front. And this is the LCD programming box, and it's marked ESC, so I'm putting that one in there. This guy goes in here. Turn this guy on, and make sure we can see that. And then you have to hit enter. I always forget, you got to push a button. Tells you the software, goes right in, and you can go through And this is nice because it tells you the names of the settings, you know, so if you kind of know what you're dealing with already. And you see they're all in there. And same deal, if you were to make a setting change to this, like you change value, you have to hit OK to save. And then it saves it. And this guy, the defaults are shown with a little asterisk as well in case you wanted to reset it. All right, so a couple things. The speed control specifications are always something that folks are up in arms about. Rated current amps, all that stuff, and a couple other pro tips that I want to go with. It comes with 6.5 millimeter gold-plated bullet plugs. That's what the spec sheet says, and if you throw a pair of calipers on there, it's pretty darn close to that as well. The battery leads are 8 gauge. The motor leads that it comes with are 10 gauge. You could remove these, solder on bigger wires if you wanted to. You could even remove these and solder your motor wires directly to these so that you're not adding plugs into the system. If you do need to use these and they can't be soldered right to your motor, which is often the case because the motors come with the wires on them, you use, you know, same thing, 6.5 millimeter bullet plugs or something along those lines. Anytime you mount your electronics, we get a lot of this. Folks want to have a mounting plate. They want to screw mount their electronics to the car. Really unsafe, unfortunately. The hard impacts that these guys take when they're at temperature can be very detrimental to their life. And while we do include this very nice piece of, you know, good sticky foam, you would want to use lots and lots of this, like 4 or 5 layers type of thing. I typically run to the hardware store and they sell real nice, like, you know, rolls of double-sided tape. And what I'll do is I'll do, you know, 1 strip here, 1 strip here, and like stack those up so that you got an open gap in the middle. It lets the speed control move around a little more, takes some of the shock damage out, gives your speed control a long, healthy life. The other one we get is the power cap modules. People want to know if they should add on the power cap modules and how to do that. Power cap modules are a great thing. They help your speed control do its job. They keep it a little cooler. They increase performance. Are they needed is the big question. If you're questioning it and you want it to run better, yes, it's needed. But no, I mean, not necessarily. You can get away with most setups. If they're not super aggressive and you're not, you know, taking them to the extremes, the internal power caps that are in there work just fine. But if you do have to get power caps installed on here, it's a little tricky because there's no solder posts. So you want to get the power caps always as close to the speed control as you possibly can. So you'd be looking at basically splicing into this wire and soldering them somewhere around here real low. So it can be very tricky. I'm going to try to run this guy without them for a while, and then we're going to pop them on and see if that does anything when we get to the far end of the testing spectrum. And then let me grab one of these big boy motors. This is the... So this guy is the third, what are these? The 4985 SL, the 1650 kV, and the plugs go right in, which is nice. So when you're doing your Xmaxx, the motor and the speed control are pretty much like side by side like that. So boink, you're just right in there. Same thing, the big dog, they use the same 6.5 millimeters that go right in as well. One thing that we did not talk about at all, the programming and all that is great. That is not going to make your truck work correctly. Once you get this physically installed into your vehicle, you connect everything, you have to calibrate it. It needs to learn your neutral, your full throttle, your full brake / reverse range. So if you don't do that process where it learns that, it's never really going to work correctly. We have other videos on that. I'm going to put a link down below for the ESC calibration video, and that'll show you the basics of how to calibrate just about any speed control in the Hobbywing lineup. So make sure that, you know, there's 3 basic steps. Step 1, put it in the vehicle. Step 2, calibrate it to your radio. Very, very important step. And then step 3, if you drive it around and you need to make changes after that, then you connect your programming box and make some changes. So, we do get some damage on the wires. The chassis in your vehicles are going to flex. Things are going to move around. Wires are going to wiggle. So you want to keep your switch wire and your input harness kind of secure. So let's say this is in the car. Your wires need to be secured so they don't want to wiggle around at the base, so you don't like get that wire wear situation. The other thing is stuff smashing into the side of the speed control, or when the chassis flexes, it'll tug on the wires real bad. So that's another reason why a little bit of wiggle in the speed control helps, because it helps dampen some of that as well. But this guy is the biggest, baddest speed control on the block, rated at a 200 amps, which doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot in the world of RC car speed controls. The amp rating system is a little skewed. For me, it's always been a sour point. I call it the spec wars. Folks go out there and they put amp numbers on their speed controls to compete with each other. And a lot of times it doesn't mean a whole lot. But basically, the bigger the speed control is, the more heat it's going to be able to dissipate, and the better it's going to run. And for Project Radd Maxx, kind of that's what we're all about, is being able to run this thing my goal is to get a setup where I can run my Xmaxx full throttle from the start of the battery to the end of the battery without, you know, damaging the batteries or overheating the setup. So that's kind of our deal here, so that we can drive it as hard as we want until it runs out of juice. Something that's pretty straightforward to do for some folks, but maybe not for everybody. And for me especially, I know that most of my rigs, they hold up fine. I can run them full pull till the end of the battery, but I don't want to see how fast I can make it go doing that. I'm kind of safety first type of guy, make the fun go longer. But there you have it, the Max 5, I don't know, quick, I guess, walkthrough on some of it. Some pro tips, a little bit of soldering, a little bit of how-tos, kind of what the settings do. Hope you enjoyed. If you do have any questions on this or anything else in the Hobbywing lineup, please drop us an email. NorthAmerica@hobbywing.com is our email address. Just address it to the Charlie Show, and we will get your questions answered right here on the bench. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you next time.